and carrying that on our shoulders.
What? Yes, I heard what Mr Farage had to say, predicting the pound will go down. I'm not sure that's the necessarily the best performance for someone who wants to be an elected politician, but let's wait and see. Nigel Farage obviously preparing to carry on putting the pressure on the Prime Minister alongside the Conservative Brexiteers today, some of whom have resigned from the government, others of whom, including Jacob Rees-Mogg, now calling for a vote of confidence in her leadership. Steve Baker saying it's time that she should go. Now, this evening, Mrs May at 5 o'clock is due to fight back. She's announced a news conference, Kay. Be interesting to hear what she's going to say. There was always going to be a news conference after the Brexit deal was agreed with Brussels, but of course things are rather more charged, and I'm thinking back perhaps all the way to 1995. When you may remember, I and others were summoned for a news conference by then Prime Minister John Major when he announced that he was resigning his leadership to fight a leadership contest because of the constant barrage from the Eurosceptics, who he famously referred to in an off-camera remark as the bastards. Maybe Mrs May is going to preempt this attempt to gather signatures against her, or confirm that those signatures have been gathered, and say that she is happy to stand in a vote of confidence because she believes her party will support her. And of course, were she to win, that would certainly turn the tables on the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg and even Mr Farage. Well, Mr Gove cancelled his engagements today as Environment Secretary. I'm told that most ministers were told to cancel their engagements because obviously at a time of sensitivity they don't want them necessarily to be exposed to the public gaze, but we understand that he has been considering his options. It is being reported that he has been offered the job of Brexit Secretary vacated by Dominic Raab. And I think it's pretty clear that given the mood of the Conservative Party, that job will have to be occupied by someone who has supported Brexit all along. We are told that Mr Gove is considering whether to take up that job and seems to be asking for conditions as to how free he would be to renegotiate or negotiate with the European Union going forward. Of course, the other option for him would be to follow Theresa May and Dominic Raab out of the government and join the Buccaneers, if you like, trying to bring down Mrs May and her Brexit deal, although Mr Gove is a thoughtful man and has put himself in a position pretty much of agreeing that the nation does need a transition deal and that it's important to secure the miles.
One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Good stuff. Okay. 1, 2.
Kate has just read them. Oh, I finished them. I didn't leave till 4:15. I left 20 minutes ago. 4:15. What am I just giving you these hospitals?
Unless you want to use your lead. Does it fit that?
Do you know what? I've got such a dodgy connection on my lead. I'll stick with yours.
Okay.
Serving in high office is an honour and privilege. It is also a heavy responsibility. That is true at any time, but especially when the stakes are so high. And negotiating the UK's withdrawal from the EU after 40 years and building from the ground up a new and enduring relationship for the good of our children and grandchildren is a matter of the highest consequence. It touches almost every area of our national life, our whole economy and virtually every job, the livelihoods of our fellow citizens, our integrity as a United Kingdom of 4 nations, our safety and security. All of these are at stake. My approach throughout has been to put the national interest first, not a partisan interest, and certainly not my own political interest. I do not judge harshly those of my colleagues who seek to do the same, but who reach a different conclusion. They must do what they believe to be right, just as I do. I'm sorry that they've chosen to leave the government, and I thank them for their service. But I believe with every fibre of my being that the course I have set out is the right one for our country and all our people. From the very beginning, I have known what I wanted to deliver for the British people, to honour their vote in the referendum. Full control of our borders by bringing an end to the free movement of people, once and for all. Full control of our money, so we decide ourselves how to spend it on priorities like our NHS. Full control of our laws by ending the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice in the United Kingdom, getting us out of the common agricultural policy and common fisheries policy for good. That is exactly what this agreement will deliver. Free movement ended. Vast annual payments stopped. The jurisdiction of the ECJ over. Out of the CAP, out of the CFP. This is a Brexit that delivers on the priorities of the British people. In achieving these objectives, I'm also determined to protect the things that are important to us. Protect the hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs that put food on the tables of working families right across the UK. Those jobs rely on cross-border trade in goods, with parts flowing easily in and out of the UK, allowing for integrated supply chains. This agreement protects that. Protect the close security cooperation that helps keep us safe. This agreement does that. Protect the integrity of the United Kingdom and the peaceful settlement in Northern Ireland by leaving the EU as one United Kingdom and having no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. This agreement does that as well. Yes, difficult and sometimes uncomfortable decisions have had to be made. I understand fully that there are some who are unhappy with those compromises. But this deal delivers what people voted for, and it is in the national interest. And we can only secure it if we unite behind the agreement reached in Cabinet yesterday. If we do not move forward with that agreement, nobody can know for sure the consequences that will follow. It would be to take a path of deep and grave uncertainty when the British people just want us to get on with it. They are looking to the Conservative Party to deliver a Brexit that works for the whole UK, a strong economy that keeps jobs safe and wages rising, and first-class public services we can rely on, an NHS there for all of us, great schools for every child, and the homes that families need. That is what the people we serve expect, and that is what we owe it to them to deliver. Goodness me, you normally put your hand straight up after the... Laura.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News. It's very clear you want to stick to your plan. Isn't it the case, though, that others are seeking to take that decision out of your hands? And, Prime Minister, is it not the case now that you are in office, but you're not really in power?
No, when we bring the deal back, what is going to happen now is that there will be negotiations, particularly focusing on the future framework and filling their details of that out, and an EU Council meeting, and that will then be brought back to the House of Commons and to a vote in the House of Commons. I'm going to do my job of getting the best deal for Britain. I'm going to do my job of getting a deal that is in the national interest. When the vote comes before the House of Commons, MPs will be doing their job. They will need to look at that a deal. They will need to consider the vote of the British people to leave the European Union and our duty to deliver on that vote. And of course, they will be held to account by their constituents for the decisions that they take. Tom.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Tom Newton-Dunn for The Sun. Prime Minister, if there was a confidence vote held in your leadership of the Conservative Party, do you think it's in the national interest for you to fight it? And if you win by only one vote, will you carry on as Prime Minister?
Leadership is about taking the right decisions, not the easy ones. As Prime Minister, my job is to bring back a deal that delivers on the vote of the British people, that does that by ending free movement, all the things I raised in my statement, ending free movement, ensuring we're not sending vast annual sums to the EU any longer, ending the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, but also protects jobs and protects people's livelihoods, protects our security, protects the Union of the United Kingdom. I believe that this is a deal which does deliver that, which is in the national interest. And am I going to see this through? Yes. Next question. Yes. Yes. Sorry. Do you want a microphone?
Prime Minister Simon Viger from 5 News. Surely now even you have to admit this is not strong and stable.
What I think people will see is that what I and the government have done is been sticking to the job of ensuring that we're delivering for the British people. That's what we're doing. We're delivering in the national interest. And look, you know, MPs have been debating the best way to deliver Brexit ever since the referendum took place in 2016. And there's been much criticism throughout that time of the government's approach. People have been ready to point out what they don't like. But one simple fact remains, and that is that nobody has produced any alternative proposal which both delivers on the referendum and also ensures that there's no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. And I understand some people feel uncomfortable about the details in the backstop, particularly in the withdrawal agreement, and I share some of those concerns. But there's another inescapable fact. There is no deal which can be agreed with the European Union that does not involve a backstop to act as an insurance policy against a return to the borders of the past in Northern Ireland. All the other approaches, Norway, Canada Plus, etc., they would all require a backstop. And the alternative of repudiating that backstop would not only mean reneging on a promise to the people of Northern Ireland, but it would also collapse the negotiation and end hopes of securing a deal. So what has the government been doing? We have been absolutely clear in focusing on delivering what is in the best interests of the British people. Faisal.
Faisal Islam, Sky News. Prime Minister, are you not in denial about the chances of getting this deal through Parliament? And for the critics in your own party that have been sending in letters very publicly, is it time for them to put up or shut up?
What I have, as I think you may have heard me say in the House of Commons earlier today, as I've just reiterated here, I'm going to do my job of bringing back the best deal for the United Kingdom. That will then be put before the House of Commons. It will be put before members of Parliament in a meaningful vote. Their job will be to look at that deal. Their job will be to consider the interests of their constituents, and their job will be to consider how we can deliver on the vote of the British people to leave the European Union. And I think most people watching this or listening to this will recognise that this is not an easy thing to do. This is a complex negotiation. But I think what most people want to know is that what we will deliver will be in their interests. It will protect jobs, it will protect security, it will ensure a great future for this country. Yes.
Rob Hutton from Bloomberg. Isn't it time to say what you clearly think, which is that the Brexit campaign offered something that was not on the menu? It offered very, very easy trade negotiations. It offered there was going to be no problem at all with the Irish border. It was all going to be fantastically straightforward. The European Union was going to give us everything we wanted because of BMW and Prosecco and things like that. Isn't it time to say that I'm afraid some of the things that you were promised, they were never there.
No, look, I think most people in this country recognise that after 40 years of membership of the European Union, delivering Brexit, dealing with how we're going to withdraw from the EU and what our future relationship is not an easy negotiation. These are complex issues. I think what most members of the public want, those actually who voted for leave and many of those who voted for Remain as well, is for the government to get on with it. That's exactly what we're doing. And for the government to deliver a deal that is in the national interest, that is going to protect their jobs, and that is going to ensure that we have a great future for this country, and that's exactly what we're doing. Yes, over.
Julia McFarlane, ABC News. Prime Minister, what would you say to Britain's friends and allies abroad who are watching all this happening and witnessing what's increasingly looking like a government in chaos?
I think what people in Brussels will be seeing is that the government has agreed the withdrawal agreement. They've recognised, and the draft outline political declaration. They have recognised that by the fact that President Juncker has written to the EU Council, to President Tusk, to say that decisive progress has been made in the negotiations, and on that basis, a council has been called for the 25th of November. And I think they see a government that is intent on working with them to ensure that we deliver a good deal for the British people. But as I've always said, I think a good deal for the UK is a good deal for the EU as well. Robert.
Prime Minister, you've said that your deal is in the national interest, but your party is deeply divided on it, perhaps more divided than any of us have ever seen. Are you prepared to risk the breakup of your party to deliver the deal you believe in?
As I've just said, Robert, in answer to an earlier question, MPs have been debating how best to deliver on the result of the referendum ever since the result of the referendum took place. I think what the British people want us to do, and I believe what MPs will do when it comes to the vote in the House of Commons, is focus on the fact that people have voted to leave and focus on how we do that in a way that is good for the United Kingdom. I'm committed as Prime Minister to bringing the best deal back for the United Kingdom. That's what I'm going to be doing, and I expect when we come that members of Parliament across my party will look at that deal, will recognise the importance of delivering on the vote of the British people, and recognise the importance of doing that in a way that does protect people's jobs, that does protect our security, and does protect our United Kingdom. George?
Gordon Rayner from The Telegraph.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right. Prime Minister...
You got the G right at
least. There are reports tonight that Michael Gove has been asked to become the new Brexit Secretary, but that he will only take that job on condition that he is allowed to go back to Brussels and try for more concessions. Will you allow whoever becomes the new Brexit Secretary to do that, to try and get more concessions? And there have been no announcements yet on any appointments to replace people who've resigned. Are you struggling to find people who want to fill those roles?
Now, I've had actually rather a busy day, as you might have seen, 3 hours in the House of Commons. Seriously, look, Michael has been doing an excellent job at DEFRA, and particularly in his defence of the fishing industry. And as you'll see, there's some very important elements of the outline political declaration which recognise that the United Kingdom will be an independent coastal state in the future. Fishing is an issue that matters to people, and Michael's been doing an excellent job in terms of ensuring that we're delivering on that commitment that we have to come out of the common fisheries policy. I haven't appointed a new DEXU secretary yet, and I will of course be making appointments to the government in due course. Jason?
Thank you. Jason Groves from the Daily Mail. Just to follow up Tom's question, we've seen several of your colleagues today declare that they no longer have confidence in your leadership. What will you do if there's a vote of no confidence in the coming days?
Well, as I said earlier, look, leadership is about making the right decisions, not taking the easy decisions. As Prime Minister, my job is to get the best deal for Britain and to bring that deal back to the House of Commons, and that's exactly what I am focused on doing. I think members of the public want the government to get on with delivering on Brexit for them. And as I said earlier, am I going to see this through? Yes. Who shall we have here in front?
Prime Minister, thank you very much. Nick Robertson from CNN. You've talked about leadership as being the position of taking hard decisions, the right decisions, that some of the choices have not been easy. Would you share with the country now some of those decisions that you personally have found have been the hard, tough, not easy decisions to take?
Well, in relation to the deal that we're looking at, there's, as I've said before, I recognise there are concerns about the backstop. That is an issue, and I share many of those concerns. And the decision to go forward and on the basis that we have was not an easy one. There was a very good and impassioned debate that took place in the Cabinet yesterday over these issues. But overall, looking at the national interest, we agreed as a Cabinet and as a government that the deal that we have is the right one to proceed with, to go to the next stage of the negotiations, and obviously those negotiations will lead up to the EU Council on the 25th of November. Mesa?
Thank you, Prime Minister. Mesa Hall from the Daily Express. Ever since you've been in this job, you've always been adamant that the country will leave the EU in March next year. Over the last couple of days, you've talked about the risk of no Brexit. Do you think, given the forces that are lined up in opposition to your deal, that that is now becoming a definite threat?
Well, there were a number of members of Parliament who stood up in the House of Commons today and said that their view was that staying within the European Union was the right thing to do. I disagree. We gave the vote to the British people. Parliament overwhelmingly gave that vote to the British people to decide whether or not to stay in the European Union. The people voted to leave, and I believe it is our duty as a government, I believe it's our duty as members of Parliament to deliver on that vote of the British people. And we will be leaving on the 29th of March 2019. On the edge there, sorry, yes,
Thank you, Prime Minister. Matthew Thompson from LBC. I'm just wondering to what extent this crisis is to some extent of your own making, in the sense it's a failure of expectation management and not bringing people like the DUP and hardliners within your own party along with you. Obviously, they weren't going to like what was in this deal. Should you not have brought them on board a little bit more quickly?
We have been working on this deal and negotiating on this deal. There have been various staging posts where we've made clear to people what the approach that we're taking in relation to these issues. That happened in December at the joint report, obviously. Then there was further information that we put forward in the spring, and then in July our approach was clearly set out for people. We have, of course, been discussing with colleagues and with people in the House of Commons, as we have been discussing with business and others as we progress through in putting this deal together. What has been the focus, as I said earlier, is making sure that the deal that we deliver is a deal that delivers on the vote of the British people, that does so in a way which is in the best national interest, which ensures that we protect people's jobs and livelihood and security, but also ensures that we are able to move forward outside the European Union as a global Britain, and, for example, to ensure that we can negotiate trade deals around the rest of the world. I believe that's what's in the interests of people here in this country, and that's what we will deliver. I'll take a couple more questions. Now, George.
Sorry. Paul War, HuffPost.
Oh, have I done it again?
Lots of reporters...
Anybody who thinks I've got George Parker on my mind is, you know...
It's lots of reporters with no hair, Prime Minister. I think that's it. Prime Minister, if the House of Commons voted by a majority for another referendum, for a people's vote, would you see that as a resignation matter, or would you see that as you having to implement the will of Parliament as Prime Minister?
Well, look, I have taken a very clear view about the question of a second referendum. I've made that view clear to members of Parliament. And I think actually across the House of Commons, most members of Parliament recognise that they gave a vote to the British people, and the British people voted, and it's up to us to deliver on that vote and not have a second referendum. As far as I'm concerned, there will not be a second referendum. We asked people their view. They said we should leave the European Union, and we will leave the European Union, and we will leave on the 29th of March 2019. Look, if you look across the House of Commons, yes, there have been some voices for a second referendum. But I believe, actually, when people come to look at the deal that we bring back from the European Council, the final package that we bring back from the European Council, they will look at delivering on the vote of the British people and at doing so in a way that protects the interests of their constituents. And I believe that is the question that members of Parliament will be asking themselves at that point, not about a second referendum. I'll take, as I said, just a couple more. Just in there.
Hi, I'm Hannah Al-Othman from BuzzFeed News. My question is, given the difficulty you're likely to have getting this deal through Parliament, do you regret calling a general election last year?
No, I don't regret calling a general election last year. As I say, you know, when it comes to the vote in Parliament, there will be a decision for MPs to take. I'm going to do my job. I'm going to bring the best deal back for the British people, and MPs will then do their job and, of course, be held to account by their constituents for it. So the last question I'll take here.
Thank you. Joe Waltz, The Independent. Prime Minister, you're a cricket fan. From the outside, it looks like, at the moment, you're a long, long way off getting the number of runs that you need, but your batsmen are dropping like flies. Is there any number of wickets that will fall in your cabinet before you resign as captain?
Well, can I just say that you might recall from previous comments I've made about cricket that one of my cricket heroes was always Geoffrey Boycott. And what did you know about Geoffrey Boycott? Geoffrey Boycott stuck to it, and he got the runs in the end. Thank you.
To note is that first it was surprising in the context of the 24 hours where we have seen resignations of her ministers, but not surprising in that she has stuck to the same words ever since from the very beginning. She said that she has secured the best possible Brexit deal that is in the interest, the national interest. It is not for her own political interest. And when asked about the possibility of a confidence vote and what she's going to do, she kept repeating this, that leadership is about taking the right decision, not the easy one. And I think we strategically, this is what our analysts have been saying is probably the best approach for her at this point. But it is really interesting about how this plays into the last 24 hours. So joining me to analyze that is our correspondent, Alistair Sanford. Alistair, I mean, she said a lot of the key words she kept repeating before: protecting jobs, protecting security, families, borders. And so this is clearly the message that she has started off the negotiations with, still the same now. Even, I mean, despite the 24 hours of opposition that we've seen from her ministers.
I think it was interesting, Tessa, that throughout her statement, she didn't mention the leadership challenge at all. I mean, if we were expecting her to waver again, just like there was a question mark when she appeared in the Commons after Dominic Raab's resignation and that of others at lunchtime, would she appear contrite or whatever, or react to that? No, she's still on the same track. And she started off by saying this is a relationship that the UK has had with the EU for over 40 years. Being in high office brings an incredible amount of responsibility over that, and it's really her duty to do what she sees as being in the national interest. And it was only when she was questioned about the leadership challenge that she then said, well, in her words, I think it's, I take you have to take the right decisions, not the easy ones.
Exactly.
Will I see it through? Well, yes. So I think that, as you say, we've seen the similar sort of rhetoric again, saying she's delivering on the referendum, the same things we've heard right from the start: controlling our borders, our money, our laws, and coming out of things like the Common Agricultural Policy and Common Fisheries Policy. What we also heard from her as well was saying, I'm here to defend jobs. And she went further, saying manufacturing is what puts food on the table. And then she talked about just-in-time supply chains. Now, those are the sort of things that business has been banging on about for the last 2 years and getting very worried about the consequences of a no deal or a very bad deal. And Theresa May has taken that on board. But we perhaps haven't heard enough of that, really, fed into
On that
this
side,
argument in favour of this sort of deal.
And also, what's interesting is that it seems like she used this platform as a rebuttal to, the criticism that she's heard throughout the day. And one, of course, we know the sticking point is the the Irish border, basically. And she said that, no matter what deal you propose, this is the best option. Even if it was Canada-style, Norway-style, you would still need a backstop. So there she is again, defending that backstop, which really is a point of contention within her party.
Yes, it came under the. I think she was asked about what the most difficult thing was and, to deal with, and she did say, well, it was the backstop, and said that came under the category of yes, there will be difficult and uncomfortable decisions ahead. Now, Theresa May has said things like that before, even hidden away, if you like, in the small print of things like the Lancaster House speech or that famous speech to the Conservative Party conference. There were lines there about, of course, there'll be give and take on both sides, but the headlines that came out and were like red meat to the Brexiteers were the kind of no more European Court of Justice jurisdiction in the UK, no more throwing huge sums of money at Brussels and that sort of thing. So the difficulty was balancing those two. Instead, it wasn't balanced like that. It was very heavily weighted towards those red lines, of course, which have come back to smack her in the face now.
And it was also interesting is that she reiterated the date of Britain's exit. She said that is not changing. And you've been talking about the possibility of extending the exit of the UK, but she actually said, no, we are leaving then.
While the possibility is still there, the path ahead is, as she said, initial approval now, then the EU summit, then it goes before Parliament, and then we've got to run up to March the 29th. She's still sticking to the official line and is not going to open up all sorts of a can of worms by suggesting there may be
Although that
an alternative.
possibility is in the draft deal.
Yes, but her line is that she wants to plough ahead to get this deal agreed and approved and ratified so that Britain can smoothly exit the European Union, which she says is in the national interest. And the alternative, she says, are no deal or no Brexit.
All right, thank you. For the moment, let's leave it there. Alistair Sanford, our correspondent. Let's cross live to Brussels. Now we have our correspondent there, Shona Murray. Shona, the Europeans, those the EU27 watching this speech, probably would be happy to hear the same kind of rhetoric that they've been hearing. She's backing this deal, this draft Brexit deal. What is your assessment?
Yeah, I think that's right. It seems to be back on track. I think people will be quite heartened by her performance today in the House of Commons and that quite robust statement there. And all along, after speaking to officials and people in member states, they've been saying that they hope that her mettle, her fortitude would get her through, because we've been here before with Theresa May. There's been plenty of threats on her future as Prime Minister. There's been some serious threats against her as Tory leader. She's faced it from the backbenches, she's faced it from the cabinet, she's faced it from the opposition, and she has survived. And she has endured. She's endured very serious circumstances, including, public humiliation at times. So I think they'll be quite heartened by that. Earlier on today, though, I heard terminology like utter chaos, even though there was expectations that there would be some turmoil which would evolve from the publication of the withdrawal agreement. But I think, generally speaking, they'll be quite happy. Besides all that, preparations are underway for this November 25th Council meeting, which was announced by Donald Tusk, President of the European Council, today. He said it in a very sombre tone because, as we know, Donald Tusk is very emotional when it comes to Brexit. He said even though he was sad the UK would be leaving, he would make sure that the farewell was, quote, as painless as possible. So those preparations are underway. I know member states are looking at the deal, as you mentioned so many times, 585 pages of it. I know, for example, the French government is still concerned over this UK-wide customs backstop and the fact that the UK could have some competitive advantage over member states. So they'll be ensuring that the UK signs up to all those regulations that intersect with the single market. But nothing of any there won't be any major dissent, is what I'm saying, from any of the member states. Then on Tuesday we'll have this publication of the political declaration, a much more fleshed out version than that was in the withdrawal agreement, and that will essentially state a pact, a non-legally binding pact, albeit from both sides, which will talk about how they'd like to see their partnership in the future. It'll relate to security, foreign affairs, proper cooperation on foreign affairs. The UK is still a big player on the global field. And of course, then it'll be trade. So it'll probably be a little bit more positive, although it will build on this customs union backstop that has been written about and that is so controversial. Publicly speaking, as you can imagine, and as is fair, the EU officials, member states, aren't saying anything about what's actually happening in the UK from a political perspective. That's the business of Theresa May. She's the Prime Minister, so they will just leave her to deal with her domestic issues alone. So we did hear from Donald Tusk, from Michel Barnier, and a whole host of people today who refused to speak directly to it, only just to speak to what was published there. And take a listen to what they had to say today.
Nous ne sommes pas au bout du chemin. Et nous savons bien qu'il reste beaucoup d'étapes de part et d'autre dans le processus de ratification. Donc nous allons rester très calmes, nous allons rester très méthodiques dans notre démarche.
I think that what is delivered today on our table is the best agreement we could obtain. What this agreement is doing, that is, it combines a Brexit, because that was the purpose and the decision by the British people, with a scenario that avoids a disruption, a disaster for the economies.
All I can say is that the EU is prepared for a final deal with the United Kingdom in November. We are also prepared for a no-deal scenario.
We have presented the agreement yesterday night as agreed at the level of negotiators, which we have analyzed in depth this morning, and you can understand that I'm not going to speculate on any other possible likely or unlikely outcome.
All right, thank you for that, Shona Murray, our correspondent reporting there from Brussels. I mean, what's interesting is indeed we've heard from a lot of the EU leaders, but they have been tight-lipped as to speaking outside of that formal platform. Very, very sensitive time indeed for Brexit negotiations. All right, let us now go to Tony Connolly. He is the Europe editor of the Irish broadcaster RTE, and he was the one who first broke that the UK and the EU have a deal. Tony, good to see you there, and thank you for joining us again. What is your take on everything that's been happening? We just heard Theresa May speak. She is sticking to her line. Her rhetoric did not change. She is, backing this draft deal, despite all the questions on whether or not she is going to stay in position. What is your reading on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really for a domestic audience. It was for her own party and perhaps the wider audience of UK voters, but everything she said in the speech she said before, going right back to the Lancaster House speech, the Mansion House speech, her Conservative Party conference speech after the Brexit referendum, after she became Prime Minister, there's nothing really new here. She's just trying to put forward her conviction that this is the right moment for this deal, that being leader is something that doesn't mean you're not always doing something that's popular, but you're doing what is right. None of that will actually make any difference to the national capitals, who have spent months negotiating this agreement. And I think there'd be very little appetite at all for any reopening of the negotiations, any reopening of this text.
And Tony, I mean, one of the questions asked after her speech was, is she in denial about her ability to hold on to power? In fact, that she probably does not have power anymore. Or is this strategically the best approach she can pursue at this point?
I think it's her last chance, really. I think there is a slight air of desperation in her presentation of this news conference today. She's really appealing to people in her party out of a sense of desperation that she has to stick with this plan. And I don't think that those people who are minded to move against her and who absolutely loathe this withdrawal agreement are likely to be convinced by her arguments today.
Tony, reaction from Ireland. I mean, we've had 24 hours since we last spoke to you. Has anything changed? What are you hearing?
Well, the view in Dublin is that the text has been agreed and that there's really no appetite to reopen it, and that the Irish government is largely content with what it achieved in these negotiations. While there's sympathy for Theresa May, and Leo Varadkar, the Taoiseach, talked about her mettle and her resilience, that's really as far as it goes. I can't see the Irish government moving on any of its red lines because of what's been happening.
And what about on the EU side? I mean, yes, they're preparing for that November summit, potentially happening, still on the table. But what about the no deal scenario? They are still preparing for that. What is the feeling that you're getting?
they are still preparing. Those preparations are ongoing. There have been meetings at various levels this week. There was one this morning on financial services, what to do there if there is no deal. And that is going to continue. But obviously, as we face into this political crisis in the UK, they are going to be looking in more detail at that kind of issue. Because, again, the EU is very concerned about what will happen in member states, and they're urging member states to take whatever steps they can across the board to prepare for a no-deal outcome.
All right, very quickly, Tony, what is the biggest sticking point you see in this draft deal? Are they still the same?
Well, the backstop, the UK-wide customs arrangement, they're the major issues for Brexiteers and Eurosceptics. They feel it doesn't meet the red lines of the British government and doesn't give them back sovereignty and control.
All right, thank you for that. Tony Connolly, Europe editor of the Irish broadcaster RTE. Thank you. All right, let us cross live to our London correspondent, Vincent McAviney. He was at that news conference, that speech, during which Theresa May again reiterated her stand, backed that Brexit draft deal. Vincent, good to see you there. So you were inside. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, that's right. I've just ran down here, Tessa. It was quite interesting. The press conference was delayed about 20 minutes. We weren't sure what was happening. Theresa May still has to make some appointments for the people that have quit the government today. We thought that's what she might have been doing, but we understand Michael Gove is on his way to Downing Street now. When she did finally come into that room, at the start of her speech, she was quite solemn, and she started talking about serving in high office, the honour of it, but the heavy burden. And everyone drew their breath for a minute because we thought that Theresa May might actually be about to resign. But no, Theresa May then went into what's affectionately known as the May boss and started talking about the strength of the deal, how it was the only one that would work, and kept reiterating one message, and that was really for those in Parliament, that her deal is the only thing that protects jobs. She mentioned jobs, I think, around 6 or 7 times, saying her deal was the only thing that protected the economy and the integrity of the United Kingdom as it is now. So Theresa May trying to keep on going. We've seen this from her a number of times, and though she did look tired, understandably, and she said, you know, she'd done a full 3 hours in the House of Commons earlier, she was quite defiant in the face of what has been going on today, something we've seen from her before. She feels duty-bound to deliver this, and she wasn't going to back down. And then she took lots more questions than I've ever seen her take in a press conference. She took questions from around the room. She said that it wasn't a mistake to call the election last year. She said no way again on a second referendum. So Theresa May is doing what she does. She is sticking to the course and saying that she is strong and stable.
All right, Vincent, you mentioned that Michael Gove is on his way down there, and there have been rumors that we were seeing that he might possibly be offered the Brexit negotiator job. What is the update on that? Is there any validity to that?
Well, the suspicion is that he's on his way to Downing Street now. He apparently has been held up by some kind of actual family emergency today because he cancelled events he was due to do earlier in the day. So Michael Gove, it's thought, is on his way and has been offered that job. It's interesting that that information has leaked out. The suspicion is that Downing Street have let that leak to put pressure on him to accept the job. Because for Theresa May now, it's pretty much impossible to invite someone from the Brexiteer side into government to take up that position. They won't take it. Many of those in the ERG have been submitting their letters of no confidence. So she needs to promote someone in the cabinet already. The sort of biggest Brexiteer left ready for promotion is Michael Gove. He's the Environment Secretary. He's someone who many people wanted to take up the job months ago when David Davis stood down. He was the one that Brexiteers wanted, aside from Dominic Raab, to take on that responsibility. So I think Theresa May is going to be putting the pressure on Michael Gove to take that job to try and stabilise the government. But then it's whether or not he might demand of Theresa May that he then goes back to Brussels to try to negotiate for a better deal, something which David Davis and then Dominic Raab, they felt sort of stymied by the Prime Minister and her team having sort of taken control of those negotiations.
And considering that she had already stood her ground despite changes in her Brexit negotiator, I mean, it's rather potentially unlikely that she will let Michael Gove do that. Or that's something we have to wait and see. And you know, Vincent, a lot of the journalists asked her obviously about the possibility of a confidence vote, and her reply was almost philosophical the whole time. It's about making the right decision, not the easy one. What is the sense that you were getting from the people you've been talking to about that possibility?
That's right. I mean, MPs here today on the Brexiteer side, you know, they've publicly put in their letters, they've tweeted them out, and Brexiteers are, you know, pretty angry. We saw that earlier on when Jacob Rees-Mogg came out just behind me. They have now given up on the Prime Minister. Many of them thought that a Remainer like Theresa May could never actually deliver Brexit. So I think it is likely that that toll of 48 letters is creeping nearer. There was one suspicion, actually, that what Theresa May was about to do in that press conference was something that John Major did back in 1995 with the threat of a no-confidence vote looming over him on the same issue on the EU. He actually triggered a leadership vote. So he it started the process, took hold of it, and won successfully. There was a suspicion that Theresa May might have been about to do that, knowing the threshold was clear. It was almost there. And she would have tried to sort of get control, because once you've won one of those votes, you have then a year's window until they can do that again. But Theresa May didn't do that. I'm just going to bring in now Nina Shook, who's a political commentator. Nina, I mean, I was in the room, so I was very much sort of feeling the vibe of what everyone was saying and what Theresa May was like. But as a watcher and listener, what did you think from out here?
I think it was quite evident that Theresa May came out fighting, you know, and we kind of expected that because we weren't sure that the ERG had those 48 signatures to take her down. And I think fundamentally the question is, you know, if Theresa May were to step down, or there were to be a new election, or even a new referendum, I think the substance of what's on the deal for the UK vis-a-vis the EU is not going to change. So domestically, the politics here are going to be messy. I think what she has going in her favor is that there's no clear successor to her if she goes. But on the substance, nothing changes. Nothing has changed, as she likes to say.
Nothing has changed. And what do you think the rest of the world thinks? I mean, Brussels has been very quiet today, but the pound has plummeted against the dollar and the euro. What do you think the rest of the world is thinking as they watch on at all this?
I think it's safe to say that the rest of the world is looking towards Westminster and wondering, you know, how could this chaos even begin? I can't imagine such a self-inflicted political crisis at a time of peace. So I think the rest of the world certainly hasn't come out of this thinking that the UK is much stronger and better because of the choice to leave the European Union, which it took in 2016.
And Theresa May, you know, one of the points that was raised in the questions is twice in the past 48 hours, she has said the deal is her deal, no deal, or possibly no Brexit. She said that twice, which was quite remarkable for her. I mean, what do you make of her saying that?
I think that means that Theresa May is basically trying to scare the hard Brexiteers within her cabinet and within her party to back her, because basically I think the real options are take it or leave it, but she's trying to get the Brexiteers to back her because by scaring them by saying that, you know, there might be a second referendum or maybe we'll stay in, they'll back her. I don't think that's realistically a viable option that's on the table.
Mm-hmm. And if, as we suspect, Michael Gove might be about to become the Brexit Secretary, do you think he could get anything out of Brussels, any more from them in concessions?
Absolutely not. I think it was entirely inevitable that the UK would end up with the deal that it has now. And many Brexiteers here, including in the cabinet, say that's because it's Theresa May's fault. You know, her negotiation was bad. Ollie Robbins and the civil service did a bad job. But I think the reality is, had it been Michael Gove, Boris Johnson's, it does not matter. The UK could not have gotten a better deal than what it has now. And that's quite evident if you look at the EU's negotiating positions and its own priorities in these negotiations. So does Michael Gove become Brexit minister? I don't think on substance anything changes.
And of course now there are calendar dates in place. We think that there is an EU Council meeting on the 25th of this month that's been penciled in. I mean, Theresa May, how do you think she can approach that meeting? What is she going to say to the other EU 27?
I think she'll be telling the EU 27 to not do anything to upset the boat, and that's why the EU 27 have been very quiet. If you see them taking trouble, not to get involved in the domestic affairs of the United Kingdom. This has always been an uncertain process domestically for the UK. As far as the EU 27 are concerned, their position has been clear. It has been clear for months, and it will continue to be. I think they'll be worried that Theresa May might not be Prime Minister, in which case they, like the rest of us, are scratching their head and asking what happens next.
And I mean, you can probably hear it here. There are some protesters down here on both sides, the Brexiteers, the Remainers. There's been a couple of polls recently, I'm thinking about the Channel 4 one a couple of weeks ago, that said the balance had actually swung more towards Remain. I mean, if there was to be a second referendum, by whatever happens, if the deal fails, what's your sense on where the British people are at with all this now?
I think that it wouldn't be politically expedient to have a second vote, and that's because it's my view that the population more or less is split right down the middle. These protesters on both sides here show how emotive the feeling is on both sides. So were there a second referendum, I don't think there'd be a shift to either one side that would substantially be enough to quell this debate, and rather it might make it even more bitter, because let's say there's a second referendum and Remain wins by a margin of 2 or 3 points like the first time round, but to the other side now, it will start a long toxic political discourse in this country about democracy being subverted and the will of the people being overturned. The referendum was done. I think the choice has been made, and now, regardless of whether or not it's economically expedient, they have to follow through with the consequences of the referendum. Otherwise, why call it in the first place?
Well, that's what Theresa May was saying in that press conference earlier. She was saying very much still that she's going to stick with it, but will her party stick with her, Tessa? That is now the question, whether there's any more letters of no confidence overnight, and whether Theresa May is then fighting a leadership battle when she wakes up tomorrow.
All right, thank you for that, Vincent McAviney and Nina Schick there, coming to us live from London. Right, so if you're just joining us tonight, Theresa May, the British Prime Minister, has had an extraordinary 24 hours. She had just given a speech at 10 Downing Street. She was reiterating backing her Brexit deal despite a day of resignations. The most senior minister to resign is her Brexit Minister, Dominic Raab. In that speech that Theresa May gave, she again, with confidence, reiterated that this is the best deal that the UK can get with the EU. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
This is a Brexit that delivers on the priorities of the British people. In achieving these objectives, I'm also determined to protect the things that are important to us. Protect the hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs that put food on the tables of working families right across the UK. Those jobs rely on cross-border trade in goods, with parts flowing easily in and out of the UK, allowing for integrated supply chains. This agreement protects that. Protect the close security cooperation that helps keep us safe. This agreement does that. Protect the integrity of the United Kingdom and the peaceful settlement in Northern Ireland by leaving the EU as one United Kingdom and having no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. This agreement does that as well. Yes, difficult and sometimes uncomfortable decisions have had to be made. I understand fully that there are some who are unhappy with those compromises. But this deal delivers what people voted for, and it is in the national interest. And we can only secure it if we unite behind the agreement reached in Cabinet yesterday. If we do not move forward with that agreement, nobody can know for sure the consequences that will follow. It would be to take a path of deep and grave uncertainty when the British people just want us to get on with it. They are looking to the Conservative Party to deliver a Brexit that works for the whole UK, a strong economy that keeps jobs safe and wages rising, and first-class public services we can rely on, an NHS there for all of us, great schools for every child, and the homes that families need. That is what the people we serve expect, and that is what we owe it to them to deliver.
So that was the British Prime Minister again there with confidence backing that draft Brexit deal. All right, let us cross live to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who is in London for us. Darren, you and I were in Strasbourg only yesterday, in fact. So we had a sense of what the European MEPs were feeling about Brexit, and now you're in London. What is your take on, comparing the two reactions to the Brexit deal that we see unfolding?
Well, there couldn't be a greater contrast, could there, Tessa? But what an extraordinary day in British domestic politics. A day in which Theresa May still remains as Prime Minister, despite cabinet resignations, despite the alleged rumours of a coup being launched against her. She remains defiant in Downing Street. And it's quite extraordinary watching that press conference she's just held in the last hour or so, in which she's incredibly resolute, almost actually on very good form, standing up to her critics, saying that this is the best deal, her deal, the only deal that essentially the British government can get from the European Union, and really essentially saying to the hard Brexiteers and to those that have resigned today, come and get me. Really, because I'm not going anywhere. And for whatever you think about Theresa May, I mean, she has got an incredible amount of resilience. Many people thought she would never even get to this stage, let alone be here at the end of what has been a grueling day for her. She made reference to one point when she said it'd been a rather busy day. I think that's a slight underestimation. However, Tessa, I think there is also a sense that many people, this is where they get frustrated really with Theresa May, is that she does seem entirely unable to react to events. She's been accused of being a robot in the past, a Maybot, that she just simply does not change course when it's bleedingly obvious that she needs to. And I think on this point, a lot of Conservative MPs tonight will be concerned that yet again the Prime Minister is digging in rather than listening to their concerns. You know, to lose one Brexit secretary is bad, to lose two is really, really bad in the space of, 3 or 4 months. And what next? Because I put to her and I put to the viewers watching, the fundamentals here at Westminster have not changed in Parliament. Essentially, it is looking incredibly difficult that Theresa May will be able to get that deal through. Of all the people, all the Brexiteers, all the opposition MPs, even some of the Remainers within her own party, if they stick by the word and say that this deal is not going to float, as they have done today, when you look at the maths, she's just not going to get through Parliament. Where does she turn to next? That's the big question tonight for Theresa May.
Darren, that's exactly what I wanted to ask you, because you say that many are surprised that she even managed to get to this point. Is she in denial about her chances of getting the deal through Parliament, or is there some manoeuvring or movement that we probably don't know about?
I think what she's doing is she's essentially doing what many leaders do, which is kind to stand up to opposition, to trying to dig in to her position, to double down in a sense. And what she's hoping is that she can continue just to persevere on, despite the political drama here at Westminster, despite the resignations, despite the suggestions that there could be 48 letters in Graham Brady, the chair of the 1922 committee's drawer, calling for a leadership challenge, and she hopes that by going to Brussels next week, by signing this deal, what she comes back and there is this vote in Parliament, Tessa, the MPs then do have a choice, and the choice is the deal that she's made with the European Union, no deal at all, and thus a hard Brexit, which the vast majority of MPs don't want, or essentially stopping the process entirely and remaining inside the EU, which Brexiteers don't want. So essentially she's hoping, which has been our strategy ultimately all along, that she'll not just have to rely on her own Conservative MPs, but when it comes to it, when she's asking people to really act in the national interest, she's trying to appeal to those Labour MPs as well. Those Labour MPs who accept that Brexit's going to happen and that actually her deal, no matter what they think of it, is better than no deal at all.
All right, thank you very much for that. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, there in London. All right, so we are covering a special Brexit edition here on Raw Politics, an exciting day in European politics. We'll go for a quick break. Don't go away.
Once there was an organism so small, no one thought much of it at all. People said it just made a mess. But ExxonMobil scientists put it to the test. They thought someday it could become fuel and help reduce CO2 emissions. Wouldn't that be cool? And that's why ExxonMobil scientists think it's not small at all.
We come from many places on the planet. We don't necessarily think the same way. All different, but as one. Because all views matter. We are All Views. Our purpose is to help people understand what others think and why, through sharing the compelling diversity of news, helping you form your own opinion. Euronews. All Views.
Welcome back. Welcome back to Raw Politics. We're doing a special coverage of Brexit today. It's really quite an extraordinary and exciting 24 hours. We just heard just a few moments ago from the British Prime Minister Theresa May. She was at 10 Downing Street giving her speech, a much anticipated speech, considering ministers resigning today. Here is a live shot, live images now coming from London, just outside 10 Downing Street. Earlier, all eyes were on Theresa May as she came out to reporters who were anticipating what she had to say, as she still backed her Brexit deal. She stood by her word. She used words that brought back the meaning of the Brexit deal to the national interest. She said this is the best deal that the UK can get that is benefiting the entire United Kingdom. And she said that this is about integrity, this is about safety, and that but when it comes to the confidence vote, that leadership is about making the right decision, not the easy one. That is the only thing she would say about the possibility of a challenge to her leadership. She also said that this deal is going to bring about jobs, bring food to the table, protect jobs and security, protect borders, and bring back control. I mean, essentially the same rhetoric that she has been giving when it came to the Brexit deal negotiations. Now, she has been facing a lot of criticism, a lot of challenges from her ministers, also from her cabinet. And today she was at the House of Commons. She was facing lots of questions, she faced a grilling as well. Let's take a listen.
The withdrawal agreement and the outline political declaration represent a huge and damaging failure. This is not the deal the country was promised, and Parliament cannot, and I believe will not, accept a false choice between this bad deal and no deal.
As what my right honourable friend says and what my right honourable friend does no longer match, should I not write to my right honourable friend, the member for Altrincham and Sale West?
The stark reality, Prime Minister, is that it was dead on arrival at St Thomas before you stood up.
I could today stand here and take the Prime Minister through the list of promises and pledges that she made to this House and to us privately about the future of Northern Ireland in the future relationship with the EU. But I fear it would be a waste of time, since she clearly doesn't listen.
Well, there you have it. Dead on arrival, a waste of time. These are the kind of criticisms and challenges that she faced with this draft Brexit deal. All right, let us discuss more on this with Brian McGuire. He is a reporter for Euractiv.com. Brian, we've listened to what Theresa May had said. Again, she has not changed her position at all, despite challenges and doubts over whether she can stay in power. What is your sense? What is the scenario, the most likely scenario now after hearing what she had to say?
I think she's in survival mode. This is the first thing to see, that without a change in plan, she's going to go down. And as we heard so many times today, this deal is dead. The maths simply aren't there in the House of Commons to make this work. And it's impossible to see how this can be put together again. And it's not just about the deal, remember. This is about the leadership aspirations of not just the Conservative Party, but also the Labour Party as well. They would like to see an election. They think they can have a good chance to win this. And so I think that the mood here in Brussels today, many people were absolutely astounded by Dominic Raab's resignation, first of all. But how this plays out, there has to be either an election and then probably a referendum. And personally, I don't see how you avoid a referendum at this point either. It's not absolutely on the table yet, but all the machinery towards that is moving there. There's no confidence in Theresa May. There's no confidence in this deal from any side of the House. She's in a lot of trouble.
I mean, do you think that is still a likely scenario? I mean, yes, there are former prime ministers, British prime ministers, who are calling for another referendum vote, but isn't that the most unlikely scenario at this point?
No, I think that's probably the most likely scenario at this point. There was never going to be a second referendum without absolute chaos. So the more chaos there is, the more this referendum comes into play, because the referendum is about confidence. There is a decreasing confidence in the British government's capacity to deliver any sort of sensible Brexit. And the capacity to get this deal voted through has completely evaporated. And what this means is that you're left with a no-deal Brexit. There is a small proportion of the country who's prepared to tolerate a no-deal Brexit. So there are other configurations whether people would like to see this deal accepted or whether they would like to see remain. Sky News today as well had a snap poll on this today. 54% of the British public today saying they would like to see a second referendum on this and they would like to remain. So, and this is not just a one-off. The trend for all the polls done recently has been towards this narrative as well. It's very hard for Theresa May to say this is the will of the people, this is the will of the people, when the people are saying, actually, Theresa, I don't think so.
And you are covering Brussels, the EU reaction quite closely. Do you expect any pushback on any point at all?
I think the EU is sitting in a very comfortable position. This has been a long process. Most people are saying today this is the maximum that can really be given. The word was maneuver. There's no more space for maneuver on this. I'm sure they could find some if they wanted to, but substantially nothing is really going to change. And as we would say continually, there's nothing that the EU can give to Theresa May without undermining the whole of the EU process, which will satisfy the Brexiteers, which will satisfy the DUP. And so she's stuck. She's boxed herself in with too many red lines. Dominic Raab has been seen to have overextended himself with the Irish government as well and put too much pressure in the wrong place. And the confidence in the leadership, what happens next? Does anybody actually trust the British government, given what's happened today, to hold true to any deal which they would actually agree to, even if they got it through Parliament? But when you see the man responsible for negotiating it, Dominic Raab, saying, I can't sign up to this. And only less than 24 hours ago, the Cabinet voted to hold this whole plan together. And yet today, it's all coming apart at the seams.
All right, thank you for that. Brian McGuire, reporter for Euractiv.com, talking to us from Brussels there. All right, for those of you who are just watching us on Raw Politics, we are doing a special on Brexit. We just heard a few moments ago from the British Prime Minister, still backing that draft Brexit deal, which you've heard a lot about in the last 24 hours. Let's get more analysis now from independent and British MEP Stephen Wolfe. Stephen, it's good to have you on the program with us. All right, quick reaction. What did you think of the British Prime Minister's confidence when she came out still defending her Brexit deal?
Well, I think there's one thing that you can say about Theresa May is that she firmly believes in herself and her own deal. And I think you've got to give her respect for that, and I do. But the fact that she has lost 6 cabinet and ministers today shows that from the very start of the negotiation, she set on the wrong course. That course now is leading to her ship being floundered on the political debris of what is like so many other prime ministers in the United Kingdom on the EU. And I think now she has to really face the truth that this deal is dead. It will not pass Parliament. It doesn't satisfy the 17.4 million voters and those like myself who campaigned for an independent Britain, not shackled to some of the aspects of the European Union. So far, we've counted at least 47 times that the European Courts of Justice have precedence over the United Kingdom's laws in the agreement, and I've not even finished completely reading the document yet.
And, Stephen, you have a background in banking and finance. We're looking at the financial markets today, the pound taking a beating, major banks reportedly holding conference calls and considering the risks of what is going on. Don't you think more chaos is simply going to be worse for the UK, that it would possibly be a viable option to just get this through Parliament?
Nobody wants chaos, whether it's in politics or in terms of financial markets. But my view is that this chaos that has been brought upon by Theresa May herself, and it could have been avoided if she'd actually decided to change tack and course many, many months ago when people had noted that the Chequers deal, which this is the basis of, was actually going to lead us into a very problematic situation. Of course, banks and businesses now have to listen to the words of the Prime Minister, what she's saying, and take appropriate action. We have said for many, many months that they should be doing so. But when we looked at recently meetings I've had concerning financial markets in the European Union, there are a lot of people who are deeply concerned about Britain being able to have a move away from regulatory alignment. That is why we should be so determined to actually change what Theresa May is trying to do and move her away from this deal.
And also, Stephen, we have the potential of Michael Gove taking on that Brexit negotiator position. We don't know that yet for sure, but considering his point of view, his feelings about this, that he wants to renegotiate, where do you think that is going?
Well, certainly if Michael Gove takes this and he has the ability and power to renegotiate it, then I think we could be in a better place. But
will Theresa May let him?
Well, I don't believe she will. You've heard so many people in Parliament today that she won't listen. Even in your clip there, the leader of the DUP has said that she set out very clear statement to them of what would happen in the negotiations, what would happen in the deal, and there would be no separation of Northern Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom. And he said very clearly, she won't listen. So if she's not going to listen to a partner that she's told very clearly, she won't listen to strong ministers like David Davis before he resigned, and won't listen to Dominic Raab whilst he was in that role, why will she listen to Michael Gove?
All right, thank you for that analysis. Stephen Wolf, independent MEP there talking to us. Thank you. All right, let's go back to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who is in London for us, and he is being joined by Chris Leslie, a Labour MP. Darren.
Yeah, hello, Tessa. As you say, we're still here outside Parliament, just over an hour, or under an hour, I should say, since Theresa May made that speech in which she said essentially she is digging in and not changing her deal is essentially the only deal. Let's speak to Chris Leslie. He's an opposition MP here in Britain, but someone who campaigned quite vigorously, I think, to say, for Remain. What did you make of the Prime Minister's speech?
Well, I think a lot of people, it's a very British thing, will probably have a sort of sneaking sympathy for her, because for the past 2 years she's been trying to make this Brexit plan work. But it can't work because, of course, it's impossible to fulfil a lot of the fantasy promises that the Leave campaign were offering at the time of the referendum. They were promising that we could get out of all of these, treacle-laden European alliances and all the costs, and we could keep all of the access to markets to sell our goods and services. Of course, that was never impossible. You could never square that particular circle.
But you could put it that, she spent 18 months negotiating this deal. She's got a deal. She thinks it's the best deal she possibly could have got, and that's possibly true from Europe. Shouldn't she fight for it?
Oh, she is fighting for it, but unfortunately she won't get it through the House of Commons. It was very evident to me today. That's why in my question I said it was quite clear this deal doesn't command the House of Commons. And when I said, put your hands up, on the opposition benches, who supports the Prime Minister's plan, not a hand went up in the air.
So you think this strategy for relying on Labour votes is just not going to work?
Well, it was. She never approached the Labour Party, and of course, if she'd have not put down those ridiculous red lines right at the beginning, no single market, no customs union, she interpreted the referendum result, I think, in a very hard Brexit way. And therefore she's pursued that particular course and come up with this plan which just won't get through. Certainly from my point of view, it would be damaging, job-wrecking, trade-suppressing, rule-taking arrangement. But of course for the hard-right ERG, they oppose it because it's not the purest no deal that they would prefer. So she just doesn't have the numbers.
But if it comes down to it, and it is this deal or no deal, would you not support it? This is better than no deal, surely.
Well, I don't think that is actually the choice. It's quite clear to me, and people should, buy shares in a people's vote. The opportunity for the public to have a final say. They could choose her deal with all of its flaws and, whatever, or they could remain in the European Union. And actually, I think a lot of the other 27 European Union countries would say, actually, if the UK public democratically want to reverse out of this cul-de-sac, then they should be allowed to do so. And I think that is a growing opinion. I hope to persuade Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party to do that.
Your leader's not supporting
Well, I think he would be wise to do that. Certainly we've got at least 12 Conservative MPs, and that would be a majority if we could get into that particular perspective. So I think there is still a lot of time for this to play out. We haven't even had the first European Council in November, let alone one that comes along in December. I think she should throw in the towel now and give the country a people's vote.
How does that come about, though? I mean, essentially, what happens next? Is she going to face this leadership challenge, do you reckon?
She may face a confidence vote from within her own party. I'm not sure that would topple her. But of course, she said she's going to bring an approval motion, this meaningful vote, to the Commons. It's amendable. In fact, the government have now conceded it will be amendable. When a People's Vote amendment goes down on that and says, well, the deal should be subject to a public vote, I actually think it would be very difficult for the Labour Party to resist the wide public opinion that is moving in favour of that. Because actually, the idea of letting this deal go through just opens another 5-7 years of negotiations on future relationship. If people are kind of want to bring this to a conclusion, actually a people's vote is the best way to do it.
Just very finally on that, though, is there any evidence that people would vote differently? What have we heard this week? We've heard Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron talk about a European army. We know they want deeper integration. That is not what the people of this country want. Even soft Remainers don't want that. What makes you think that people will change their minds?
Well, I think if people want to shape Europe and our collective future, we have to be around the table and steering it. And if there are problems with proposals that come from wherever about European armies or wherever, let's have Britain actually say so, rather than be a sort of rule taker, perpetually playing catch up as almost we're some sort of second tier player in the world. This is about Britain's role in the world, and I actually think the British people have, now they've seen the consequences, they should have the right to say, no, we'd rather remain.
Chris Leslie, thank you very much indeed. In fact, you're going off to a demonstration now, another demonstration for people who are campaigning for that second referendum, or as you call it, the people's vote. What was the first one if it wasn't a people's vote?
Oh, well, the first one was in 1976, of course.
Anyway, there we go. Different sides, of course, in this argument, and this is a story, Tessa, that is going to run, of course, over the next few days. All eyes in the immediate future, though, on what Michael Gove, the current Environment Secretary, is going to do. Suggestions he's been offered the post of Brexit Secretary. She hasn't got one at the moment, clearly. Will he take it or will he not? Will he quit instead? We'll have to wait and see.
Indeed. Thank you for that, Darren McCaffrey. It seems the night is young still for you there. A lot about to happen in London. Our political editor there, Darren McCaffrey. All right, you're watching a special Brexit coverage on Raw Politics tonight. We are bringing you analysis, reports on all the latest on what is unfolding. A very dramatic 24 hours indeed. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Once there was an organism so small, no one thought much of it at all. People said it just made a mess. But ExxonMobil scientists put it to the test. They thought someday it could become fuel and help reduce CO2 emissions. Wouldn't that be cool? And that's why ExxonMobil scientists think it's not small at all.
This week on Euronews.
It's the birthplace of karate, Okinawa, an archipelago made of 160 islands. Crystalline water, jungle, white beaches, barrier reef. Places that remain pristine, where the secret of longevity is enclosed. Follow our adventures in Okinawa on Euronews and Euronews.com.
Where are we going? Is it New Zealand?
Nice try, but no.
The Sahara Desert?
Guess again.
French Alps?
No.
Traveling across Arizona?
No, much better.
Is it partying all night in a city like Shanghai?
One more guess.
Swiss mountains? Or maybe trekking across the Grand Canyon? Where are we going?
Enjoy your trip to Kazakhstan.
Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, if you're just joining us, we're doing a special Brexit coverage here on the program. The British Prime Minister Theresa May, just moments ago, about an hour or so ago, she gave a speech backing the Brexit deal, the draft Brexit deal that she had presented to her cabinet. She said that there will be no second referendum, that March 29, 2019 is the day that the UK will leave the EU. And she said that the deal she is presenting is the best possible deal that the UK can get with the EU. But this confident speech comes after a day of resignations and a lot of challenges to her leadership. The most senior minister that resigned today was her Brexit negotiator, Brexit minister, Dominic Raab. He wrote a letter saying that he cannot support the Brexit deal that Theresa May had brought on the table and therefore had to let go of his responsibilities. And hours after that, he appeared on the BBC, and this is what he had to say.
Well, look, I've been fighting for a good Brexit deal, but the terms proposed to the Cabinet yesterday, I think, had two major and fatal flaws. The first is that the terms being offered by the EU threaten the integrity of the United Kingdom, and the second is that they would lead to an indefinite, if not permanent, situation where we're locked into a regime with no say over the rules and the laws being applied, with no exit mechanism. And I think that would be damaging for the economy, but devastating for public trust in our democracy. In fairness, I think she needs a Brexit secretary that will pursue the deal that she wants to put to the country with conviction. I don't feel I can do that in good conscience, but I respect her. I hold her in high esteem. I think she should continue, but I do think we need to change course on Brexit.
Dominic Raab there explaining why he couldn't support the Brexit deal that Theresa May had presented. All right, joining us now from London is our London correspondent, Vincent Macavini. He was at that press conference. Vincent, you felt the atmosphere. There was anticipation that she was about to say one thing, but she said another. Tell us all about it.
That's right, Tessa. And when she started, Theresa May was talking about duty and the burden of having to run the country, and we all thought, oh my gosh, maybe she's about to resign. But that didn't happen. She then put out a quite robust defence, and she's really hunkering down now and talked a lot about jobs. I think she mentioned jobs 6 or 7 times. So she's trying to scare her MPs and those in the opposition into the kind of economic reality of crashing out with no deal Brexit. But we hadn't got any news at that point, and we still don't, on who will replace Dominic Raab, who we were just hearing from there as the Brexit secretary. That is now the key appointment that she has to make. The other positions, Esther McVey, Work and Pension Secretary, and the junior ministerial ranks, those can wait. But we are expecting that Michael Gove will be going into Downing Street quite soon. He has been offered the job, we believe. He's been tied up all day apparently with a genuine family matter, but Theresa May will be desperate for him to take the job because there really doesn't look to be any alternative at the moment. But I'm joined now by Ian Blackford MP. He is the leader of the Scottish National Party here in Westminster. And Ian, nice to have you with us. You spoke today in the Commons after Theresa May gave her statement. You challenged the Prime Minister. There was no mention of Scotland anywhere in those 585 pages. What did you make of what the Prime Minister had to say today?
Well, you know, it's pretty remarkable because the Prime Minister tells us that this is about equality between the different nations, and the different administrations in the United Kingdom should respect the Scottish Parliament. That doesn't happen. A near 600-page document, not one mention of Scotland, 100 mentions of Northern Ireland, Isle of Man's mentioned, Gibraltar, Cyprus, but we're simply not even an afterthought. And you know, what I find remarkable is that we've got the situation where there is differentiation for Northern Ireland for very good reasons. All of us want to make sure that the Good Friday Agreement is respected. We've had 20 years of relative peace in Ireland. We need to stand by that. But if we can do a deal that reflects the uniqueness of Northern Ireland, then the government in London also needs to respect the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government. Now, the people of Scotland voted by 62% to remain. We've made it clear in Scottish Government documents that we wish to stay in the single market and the customs union. If such deals can be put on the table for Northern Ireland, then it really is about time that the UK Prime Minister respected the position and the wishes of the Scottish people and the Scottish Government.
And how remarkable is that, given Theresa May knows that there was a referendum in 2014 where there was a very slim margin, where Scotland was threatened with being kicked out of the EU. Then when you get to the 2016 referendum, they voted so strongly to stay in that she didn't think of that as a consideration in the document.
It's just sheer intransigence, because in 2014 what we were told, if we stayed in the UK, then our future as being part of Europe would be secured. So basically we were sold a false promise on that basis. And what the SNP did in 2016 in the Scottish election, where we won that election in Scotland, is we said if there were a material change in circumstances, such as being dragged out of Europe against our will, then we need to have the right to call a second independence vote if that is what we choose. Scotland is a European country, we're a European nation, and we wish to remain so. We have benefited enormously from membership of the European Union. We benefit enormously from free movement of people. We're enriched by migration. We need young people to come and live and work and make the future in Scotland. We have an enormous demographic challenge. And we know that if we're not in the single market and customs union, it's going to cost jobs. Fraser of Allender has said that there's a potential loss of 80,000 jobs in Scotland if we don't have that access. We also know that people are going to be poorer by quite a significant degree, up to £2,300 on average. We've got a responsibility to make sure that we stand up for the economic interests of the people of Scotland, of the country. That's why this is so important for us.
And you command a sizable block of MPs in the House of Commons, in that place over there. I mean, what do you see happening now? If Theresa May survives a leadership challenge, or if one isn't called, what is going to happen over the next couple of weeks? Is there any way possible that you can say that Theresa May can get this deal through the House of Commons?
No, I mean, if you look at what happened today, MP after MP stood up across the chamber and said, this is not a deal that commands support. She has to listen to Parliament. I've consistently said to Theresa May that being in the single market and the customs union, not just for Scotland but the whole of the UK, is the least worst option. I firmly believe if that option was on the table, it's one that Parliament would support. She's got to begin to listen and understand that there is a threat to jobs. And we're here in London. We've already lost the jobs of the European Banking Authority, the European Medicines Agency, 2,000 good jobs here in London. We know about what's happening in the financial community here. She has to reflect on the reality.
And, of course, there's always the possibility that Scotland might have another referendum.
Yeah.
Do you think that if Scotland is dragged out next year of the European Union, that that referendum will be put on the fast track?
Well, what the First Minister has said, and I fully support, that once we know the Brexit destination, if there is that real threat to the economic interests of Scotland, then we have to reflect very carefully on what options that we have. Of course, the Scottish National Party is the independence party of Scotland. We need to think very, very carefully about making sure that the people of Scotland have the right to choose their own future.
Ian Blackford, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Well, that was the take from the opposition side of the House of Commons. Theresa May, though, tonight needing to fill her own ranks and also try to get some support on her own backbenches. She'll be frantically making phone calls tonight, but it's going to be a pretty hard slog. Back to you, Tessa.
Thank you for that, Vincent McAviney, our London correspondent there. All right, let us now cross to Brussels, where we have our Brussels correspondent, Shona Murray, standing by. Shona, we heard from the view from the UK. Now we'd like to hear from the view from the EU. What has been the reaction so far, or has it been muted?
Well, obviously it's been muted. You know, anyone in Brussels knows their business is not to interfere in the domestic situation in the UK, particularly at such a sensitive time, lest anything they say be misinterpreted or used or exploited to thwart the tentative situation there. I mean, people are still hoping that Theresa May's fortitude, her ability to endure the type of attacks she takes from the opposition, her party, etc., that she'll just get past this and be able to deliver on the withdrawal agreement. Right now, everybody's preparing for this 25th of November summit. That's an extraordinary summit. People are also lamenting the fact that it's taking place in the first place. You know, it's a divorce settlement. It's the first time a member state is leaving the European Union. So there's quite a sombre tone in relation to that. The other question they're asking is, if she can't get this passed, well, what next? It's not like the UK is going to sit around and wait to fall off the cliff in March. Will it trigger a general election? Will that lead to a Labour Party government? Will that lead to EEA membership? Will there be a second vote? There's some of the questions that people are asking. What was interesting in that press conference, first of all, was I think Theresa May's robust approach. I think that was well appreciated from people I spoke to. But one question she didn't answer was whether or not, if she appoints Michael Gove, he'll seek to make changes to this withdrawal agreement. And that is a flat-out no. Anyone I speak to said there's no more room to manoeuvre. The deal is done. The EU has made concessions on this UK-wide customs backstop on Northern Ireland and has maintained the integrity of the single market and the customs union. So that's it in terms of Brussels for now.
All right, thank you for that, Brussels correspondent Shona Murray reporting for us there. Well, thank you for watching Raw Politics. We had a Brexit special for you. Do stay with Euronews for more Brexit analysis and news. All the latest. Don't go away.
This week on Euronews.
The Vienna Philharmonic marks the end of the Great War with a concert for peace, a memorable performance in the Royal Opera House at the Palace of Versailles. The programme includes Ravel's Piano Concerto for the Left Hand, interpreted by Yuja Wang. Conducting it all, Franz Welzermürst. Reconciliation and hope in this edition of Musica on Euronews and Euronews.com.
Musica is proudly presented by Rolex.
Там была такая вот канитель. Короче, счет начался.
Euronews. All views.
What comes to your mind when you think of the Middle East? A place where business and culture are coming together to make a bridge between East and West? Well, from here we'll bring you our flagship regional program, Inspire Middle East. We'll bring you incredible stories, connect you with the influencers whose innovations are driving business, technology and the arts to create that vibe that is so very Middle East of the future. Be inspired and join us on Inspire Middle East every Friday on Euronews and Euronews.com.
Euronews. All views.
This Monday on Euronews.
Malta's port of Valletta is Europe's capital of culture this year and is showing off years of hard work, restoring and renovating palaces, galleries, markets, theaters, and boutique hotels, and scaling up the nightlife. We talked to some of the people who made it happen as they give us and you an intimate tour. Join us as we show you why Valletta is Europe's top cultural hotspot this year on the maiden voyage of our new program, Go Europe, on Euronews and Euronews.com.
Overflowing with nature and wildlife, it's easy to see why some call this national park in southwestern Japan the Galapagos of the Orient.
We're on the island of Iriomote in the region of Okinawa. Here, 90% of the land is covered in thick primary forest, a lush jungle with mangrove swamps that can be discovered by canoe or on foot.
One of the best ways to explore Iriomote is by river. The salty water that washes inland from the sea is the ideal environment for mangroves to thrive. The island's dense rainforest is also a perfect paradise for nature.
The biodiversity here is very rich. You can enjoy lots of activities. The sea coral is beautiful. You can canoe along the river, trek in the mountains. You can have a lot of fun in this natural environment.
Exploring the jungle interior is best done on foot, and there are plenty of hiking trails on offer. Iriomote is the second largest island in the Okinawa archipelago and home to a number of exotic species of flora and fauna, including the rare Iriomote cat.
They're going to be like, what is that?
Air quality forecast in collaboration with Copernicus.
И там была такая вот канитель. Короче, счет начался.
This is Euronews Tonight, our top stories. The British Prime Minister stands by her Brexit deal. Theresa May insists she's putting the nation first despite being hit with several resignations.
I believe that this is a deal which does deliver that, which is in the national interest. And am I going to see this through? Yes.
Cindy has more in the Cube, our social media news desk.
We've heard from politicians, but we haven't heard from everyday people about what they feel and how they feel about this draft Brexit deal. Well, that's next on All Voices.
11 people are charged over the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Saudi prosecutors seek the death penalty for 5 of them. And confusion and fear among Rohingya refugees as thousands in Bangladesh refuse to return to Myanmar. Our top story. British Prime Minister Theresa May's controversial Brexit plan has sparked a series of parliamentary resignations, but she says she still plans to see it through. Mrs May's proposed agreement faced strong opposition in Parliament today, even from members of her own party. Among those who've called it quits are 2 high-level cabinet ministers and 3 other MPs, leaving the future of her deal and her leadership in question. Still, she says it's the best deal the UK is likely to get.
As Prime Minister, my job is to bring back a deal that delivers on the vote of the British people, that does that by ending free movement, all the things I raised in my statement, ending free movement, ensuring we're not sending vast annual sums to the EU any longer, ending the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, but also protects jobs and protects people's livelihoods, protects our security, protects the Union of the United Kingdom. I believe that this is a deal which does deliver that, which is in the national interest. And am I going to see this through? Yes.
Well, several key figures in Westminster have stepped down over the course of the day over their issues with the proposed deal. Cabinet Ministers Dominic Raab, the Brexit Secretary, and Work and Pension Secretary Esther McVey issued letters of resignation this morning. Junior Government Ministers Shailesh Vera and Suella Braverman and Parliamentary Private Secretaries Anne-Marie Trevelyan and Ranil Jayawardena also quit before the debate in the House of Commons. Well, later in the day, Trade Envoy and Vice Chair of the Conservative Party, Rahman Chishti, resigned amid rumours he would not be the last. Well, Euronews correspondent Vincent McAviney joins me now from London. And Vinny, the British Prime Minister really is sticking to her plans so far, isn't she? She says it's in the national interest. How will her vow to fight on go down amongst her critics?
Good evening, Sam. Well, it has been a roller coaster 48 hours for Prime Minister Theresa May, clutching a deal before the countdown clock last night. She thought that she had got the kind of agreement of her cabinet behind her. That meeting yesterday ran on slightly longer, but she thought that she had the most of the cabinet on board with it. But then this morning she wakes up and loses very early her Brexit Secretary Dominic Raab, the second Brexit Secretary she has lost this year. And it did put everything into a bit of a tailspin for her. She also lost Esther McVey and some of those more junior ministers that you mentioned. But really, when she got to the Commons, she needed to deliver a performance. And at times of real pressure, it's something that Theresa May can do. She was on her feet for 3 hours in the House of Commons defending her deal, and then later on giving that press conference where at first she started talking about her duty and the sort of weight of leading and taking the right decisions, and we all thought for a second she might actually resign. But then no, she was back to the Maybot, back to trying to be strong and stable, selling her deal to the country, and it was quite a press conference from her. Now, to review today's events, I'm joined by Aisha Hazariki, who is a former political advisor, now political commentator. Aisha, you are someone who has been at the top of British politics. What did you make of today's activities?
In my 20 years of being around this place, Westminster, I have never seen anything like it. The United Kingdom is in a bona fide political crisis over Brexit. It is unprecedented to have this number of senior cabinet ministers resign, to have the lead person, the Brexit secretary, not just resign once, but resign twice. And I agree with you that Theresa May certainly came out swinging today. She took lots of questions in Parliament and at that press conference. I thought she was coming out to resign at the beginning of the press conference. It wasn't like she was defiant. She was sending a message saying, you know, I'm here, I'm tough, I'm not going anywhere. The problem is that ship may have sailed. It may not be within her control that she remains Prime Minister.
And if she survives the next couple of weeks, if there is a leadership challenge and she wins it or there isn't one, she's then got to go to the Commons and get this deal through. And on her own side, it doesn't look like she has the votes. She spoke to Jeremy Corbyn last night in the House of Commons, the Labour leader. Do you think Labour have any interest in trying to support the Prime Minister through this?
No. I mean, all eyes are on Theresa May, but the Labour Party, this is a very, very important moment. The future of this country and the future of Brexit and the future of Theresa May really does lie in the hands of Jeremy Corbyn. He is the only man who can save Theresa May. If he decides to prop up her deal, that's the only way she will get it through. But it doesn't look like that's going to happen. There's a number of issues with the deal that the Labour Party doesn't like, particularly around state aid rules. But also there's a political opportunity here. You know, you see from the people shouting behind us, there's a lot of division in this country right now. We're in political chaos. And I think Jeremy Corbyn feels that that will hand him an opportunity to become the Prime Minister at the next general election.
I mean, that used to be the thing of political fantasy, the idea of Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister. But what do you think the likelihood of this is now, and what would that be like?
I think there's a very high chance Jeremy Corbyn could become Prime Minister, because I think we've had 8 years of a Conservative government that, other than Brexit, there's been a lot of other problems in this country with the NHS, austerity, schools, public services. I think people might want to try something fresh, new and interesting, and I think people on all sides of politics may want to punish the Conservatives because of Brexit, and it's going to be a bit of a mess. What a Jeremy Corbyn government will look like, who knows? I mean, the truth is, at the moment, he puts forward what would be considered to be quite a reforming agenda, quite a radical agenda, quite a left-wing agenda. But a lot of people do think that the economy does need to be changed. But whoever is Prime Minister at the next general election, I think Jeremy Corbyn's got a high chance. They will inherit this mess. So in a way, they could be given a very poisoned chalice. A
poisoned chalice.
Yeah.
Well, a tweet that's been resurfacing a lot today, one from when you were advising Ed Miliband, when David Cameron famously said, you can have a strong, stable leadership with me or chaos with Ed Miliband. I mean, did you ever think it would be this chaotic?
I have never seen anything like it in my life. I'm really surprised David Cameron hasn't actually deleted that tweet.
I know, well, you know, he's busy in that shed writing the memoirs, isn't
exactly.
he? So, yeah, well,
Just trotters up.
Yeah, well, we're all enjoying the chaos. Right, well, Aisha Hazariki, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much.
Back to you, Sam, in the studio there.
Vincent McVinney there in London, thank you. Well, at 586 pages, the draft withdrawal document is a long read. But what exactly does it reveal about the UK's divorce from the EU? Euronews' Neil O'Reilly explains.
Looking into the fine print of the deal, what are the key points and what's making the EU happy and Brexiters enraged? Here's a breakdown. The text doesn't say customs union, but the UK would be part of a single customs territory until the end of the transition period on December the 31st, 2020. Britain will remain in a customs union with the EU indefinitely if a new trade agreement is not reached in that time. This measure was agreed to avoid a hard border in Ireland under the so-called Irish backstop provision. The arrangement would see Northern Ireland being part of the same customs territory as the rest of the UK and the EU. A sticking point for Brexiters, the UK can't withdraw from the backstop unilaterally. Instead, an independent arbitration panel consisting of 5 people, 2 from the UK, 2 from the EU and 1 independent person, will judge if and when the backstop can come to an end. Once the UK officially leaves the EU on March 29, 2019, both sides have agreed that Britain will enter into a transition period where it will be in a single customs territory with the EU. The document doesn't give a specific final date, literally stating only that it will end by 20XX. EU citizens living in the UK and Britons living in the EU will retain their rights and be able to have their family live with them, but will need to apply formally to remain in the country. Freedom of movement will end after the transition period and be replaced by a skills-based immigration system. There will also be visa-free travel for all short-term trips to the continent. And EU members pushed for access to British coastal waters in return for agreeing to a UK-wide single customs territory. The text sets out an aim to establish a new fisheries agreement on access to waters and quota shares for future fishing opportunities after the transition period. Neil O'Reilly, Euronews.
Well, our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, has been following this story from London, and he joins me now live from Westminster. Hello to you, Darren. It's been a difficult day for the British Prime Minister, to say the least, hasn't it? Is the Brexit deal dead?
I think you'd have to conclude that it probably is, or at least that is what people here think. Talking to MPs since I've arrived in Westminster in the last couple of hours, they do not see how the fundamentals, irrespective of what has happened today, the fundamentals have not changed, Sam. That is that there's just not simply enough MPs in that building behind me in the Houses of Parliament here in London to see that deal through. And that is the bind for Mrs May, isn't it, to a degree? Where does she turn next? What she's done tonight is she's dug down, she's essentially dug in to a degree, saying that she is going to persevere with her plan, offering that alternative, which is that it is her deal, no deal, or staying inside the European Union, in the hope that it will convince some MPs that when it comes to it, when that decision has to be made, that they will, as she would put it, fall behind the national interest rather than the party interest. But there is little sign of that happening tonight. We've had the most extraordinary day in British politics, well, since the last extraordinary day, and there have been quite a few of those recently. But for the Prime Minister to suffer a number of cabinet resignations, much speculation about an attempted coup against her leadership, with dozens of MPs submitting letters to the 1922 committee in an attempt to force a leadership challenge, and to still be standing is a sign of perseverance, Sam. You know, she is determined to stay, and there is an element of admiration, I think, for that. But also, I think there is also a reflection from some that this is what we normally see from Theresa May, and this is where the criticism comes from, that she is not willing to react to events. She's been described as a robot in the past, that she's not able to move when things change. It happened during the general election campaign, it's happened many times, and that is the criticism of Theresa May tonight, that simply, you know what, today might well not have happened. Considering all the resignations, considering all the news, all the fever pitch here, she, in that speech, reflected none of that. Many accuse her of simply not listening.
And Darren, she has repeatedly said that she won't go back to the British public for another vote on Brexit, hasn't she? But there are growing calls now for the people to have a say again. Will she have to give in?
There really are growing calls, and I don't know if we can hear them, but they're outside Parliament now. Not a very big vocal group, but a pretty loud one at that, determined to see this second referendum, or the people's vote as they call it. I mean, that is clearly an option on the table for Theresa May. She's repeatedly ruled it out, but even though quite a number of MPs do support it, the Labour opposition party, Jeremy Corbyn, doesn't support it either, simply because they feel that, you know, it is still their duty to reflect the referendum result of June 2016. People have voted to leave. And also there's little evidence, it must be said, Sam, that people have actually changed their minds, that if there was a vote tomorrow, that people would vote to stay inside the European Union. What many people want, what people in there want, the vast majority of MPs, is they don't want no deal. They don't want a second referendum, the majority of them, but what they do want is some type of deal. The problem for Mrs May is it's not her deal they want.
OK, our political editor there, Darren McCaffrey, in a very busy Westminster in London. Thank you. Well, the fallout from the UK government's division over the draft Brexit agreement hit financial markets today. I'm joined now by Euronews' business editor, Sasha Vakulina. Hello to you, Sasha. A big reaction on the markets. Tell us more.
Yeah, we saw sterling falling all day long, basically, on this series of resignations, losing over 1.5% versus the US dollar and the euro, of course. Now, I have to say that basically yesterday on the news that May got the backing of the cabinet on the plan, we saw the pound rallying because, of course, nothing matters more to the markets and the currency than the certainty and stability. So they were actually ready to accept the plan and to adjust to it, since we're so just a couple of months right before the Brexit day. And so this reaction and this big fall is exactly the reaction to to the series of resignations, not on the plan itself, but on the positive side of the story, of course, we saw the companies of the big exporters, companies rallying because they got actually very excited about the weaker pound.
And the British financial sector is really bearing the brunt of this uncertainty, isn't it? What's been the impact on the banks in particular, Sasha?
Well, I would say that banks, together with retailers, were among the biggest losers, of course. Today we saw the shares of the Royal Bank of Scotland, which is, of course, state-owned, going down by 9% in the other banks as well. Then at some moment in the afternoon, the Financial Conduct Authority said, and I quote, "As you would expect in this type of situation, we have regular contact with firms and will continue to engage with them." That's basically all they can do for the moment. But there is this growing feeling that there is more uncertainty back to the markets, and they would certainly need some support by the regulators.
Yeah, it doesn't look like there's any end in sight for that uncertainty. Sasha Vakulina, our business editor, thank you. And do stay with us here on Euronews tonight. Still to come, what does the rest of Europe make of the divisions in Britain? All the reaction from the EU after the break.
Discover Baku, Azerbaijan. A new destination at a crossroads of continents and civilizations.
Welcome back. With just 134 days to go, there's still plenty of work to be done on the route to Brexit and beyond. On the 25th of November, the EU Council will meet to finalise the draft agreement in a special Brexit summit. The agreed deal will then be put to the UK Parliament for a meaningful vote in late December. If there's a yes vote, the EU withdrawal agreement bill will need to be approved by the EU before Brexit Day on March the 29th. Then a transition period will kick in for fully fledged trade talks between the UK and the EU. Well, European politicians have given the draft Brexit Accord a tentative welcome with a sense of relief that a deal could be close. Euronews' Judith Prescott has more.
While the UK is in chaos, Brussels is keeping calm and carrying on. In Strasbourg, a planned press conference went ahead to herald the hard-won deal.
We reached an important step last night in the Brexit negotiations, but there's a long road ahead. It was an important point because it allows us to build a base of confidence on which we need, and we need that in order to build a future relationship.
The EU also defended the deal as the best one, echoing UK Prime Minister Theresa May's comments from Downing Street.
What this agreement is doing, that is, it combines a Brexit, because that was the purpose and the decision by the British people, with a scenario that avoids a disruption, a disaster for the economies, for the EU economy, but certainly for the UK economy. So it's a very, I think, important achievement.
After 40 years.
The Commission refused to speculate on the cabinet resignations in the UK.
We are not going to comment any of the internal political developments in the United Kingdom. Our negotiating partner is Prime Minister May and the UK government, and we will continue, as we've been doing until now, to work in good faith with them.
At a press conference with the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, Donald Tusk, President of the European Council, hedged his bets.
All I can say is that the EU is prepared for a final deal with the United Kingdom in November. We are also prepared for a no-deal scenario. But of course we are best prepared for a no-Brexit scenario.
All eyes now turn to Westminster. Judith Prescott, Euronews.
Well, let's head straight over to Brussels now, where Euronews' Shona Murray joins me now. Hello to you, Shona. How much is this governmental crisis in the UK actually giving the EU the upper hand in negotiations?
Well, the time for discussions about upper hands is over anyway. The negotiations are finished. They were intensified over the past couple of days. The withdrawal agreement has been signed off by Theresa May and her team and the rest of the 27 member states. They're all assessing